Hello everybody, welcome back to another video in our Exploratory Data Analysis workshop. So in the previous video, we have done a demonstration of the central limit theorem in action, which was pretty fun. So this video will focus on data visualization. So a couple libraries we use are pandas. Number one, we use Matplotlib, which is that PLT import you might have seen in the previous video. And Seaborn is abbreviated as SNS. So they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So let's visualize our data. And I know that when we read in the data frame, one thing that's really cool about the deep node ecosystem is that you can kind of see basic histograms, like, for the various columns and basic percentages for categorical versus numerical columns. But we want to make better visualizations than just, histograms and bar charts, right? And we can actually go to this visualize icon and kind of do basic visualizations. So for example, I can make a bar chart, right? And I can take, a bar chart for, you know, just the sex, right? And we can say here we can do like survived by sex, right? So we can see you know passengers that survived, and we can do it by gender. So actually let's do it this way. So let's make the y-axis sex and do survived on the x. So yeah, but anyway, you can play with this visualization. So yeah, this is just something cool you can play with in deep note as a side hustle. So we want to see the data front and back and have a good understanding, right? So we can use deep notes to visualize specific columns by clicking on the visualize widget, as I've shown you here in this relatively poor demo, but you guys can play around with it. So let's plot the P class in the form of a histogram. So we see passenger class 1, 2, and 3, and how many passengers fall in what class. And we do that here through a histogram again. And this code here allows you to take this histogram and kind of make it nicer, so you can put your y-axis label, x-axis label, and title. Usually you want to have a good descriptive visualizer, so label your axes, put your title, and put legends where needed. So that's what this x label, y label, and title are doing. We can even use SNS to do the same plot, right? You see between Seaborn and Matplotlib, at least for histogram, right? It's equivalent, right? And we can set X labels, Y labels, and titles. So we're basically making the same plot as you would do in Matplotlib, but I want to showcase kind of how you would use both Matplotlib and Seaborn. And you can really choose what library you want based on your preference, though. And there's a lot of good plotting libraries out there that are not just Matplotlib and Seaborn. I'm just giving you an example of basics. So let's suppose we want to graph the x-axis, right? Instead of by using the English name of the primary class, right? Or the priority class. So instead of 1, 2, 3, we're going to use first, second, and third. So we'll map the ones to the first, number 2 to second, and number 3 to third in the form of a dictionary, this key value lookup. So we're going to have this dictionary. And what we'll do is use this map function, right? So we're going to go through the P class column. Anytime you see a 1, you're just going to replace it with the first or map it, right? Anytime you see a 2, you're going to map it to second, and so on. And if you take a look at P class versus priority, you'll see here the 3 maps to third, 1 maps to first, and so on and so forth, right? So now that we have an English name for the priority or the P class, we can actually plot by the priority. And you'll notice the plots are going to be pretty much like similar, except you're using nicer naming and it's just more human interpretable. So we'll make the same histogram right here. This is SNS representation. I'm making a histogram. So you can see how the design looks a little bit different, right? It's kind of wider here and this is kind of more narrower. And you can actually adjust these like in the library if you search up the docs. We can even do something called a count plot. So you can get nicely different colors right here. And it's the same idea here, but presentation is important. What we'll do is take a distribution of the age. So we're going to take the age column, and since there were missing values, we're going to drop them and plot a histogram of the ages, right? And we get a similar distribution to what we've kind of had earlier, right? This is a histogram with 15 bins. So you can see how it looks a bit different. You're telling a slightly different story. This is SNS representation of plotting age. And another cool thing we can do with SNS is plotting a disk plot. So this is kind of like plotting the density curve. So when we plot the histogram, we can kind of plot this curve to get a feel for what this distribution is. And I think it's really cool, actually, right? And it could help us with some analysis, right? If we want to see if this is a Gaussian, if it's a left skewed or a right skewed distribution, I think this is helpful. So now that we have a basic feel for plotting, let's put this into action by testing out a theory. And that's going to be the subject of our next video. Till then, tune in for next time.